My name is Madeline. I am 33 years old and a successful entrepreneur today. I paid my parents $5,000 every single month so they could live a comfortable retirement. But as I stood in my wedding dress waiting to walk down the aisle, I looked out the window and saw their reserved front row seats were completely empty. When I called my mother in a panic, she snapped at me to stop being selfish because my sister was having a crisis. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. 20 minutes later, my father went absolutely crazy. To my family, I was never a daughter. I was nothing more than an open wallet. I was standing in the bridal suite of the most beautiful botanical garden in Chicago. The string quartet was playing softly in the distance outside. My bridesmaids were touching up my veil, smiling at me through the mirror. Ethan, my soon-to-be husband, was waiting for me at the altar. Everything was supposed to be completely perfect. But my stomach was tied in thick knots. Through the sheer curtains of the bridal suite window, I could clearly see the outdoor ceremony seating area. The front row on the left side, the seats specifically reserved for the parents of the bride, sat entirely vacant. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in exactly 15 minutes. My heart hammered loudly against my ribs as I quickly grabbed my smartphone from the wooden vanity table. I dialed my mother, Patricia. It rang 4 long times before she finally picked up the line. Instead of the quiet anticipation of a wedding chapel, I was suddenly hit with a massive wall of sound. There was loud thumping bass music and the distinct chatter of a very crowded room nearby. "Mom, where are you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "The ceremony is about to start. Madeline, please stop yelling." My mother snapped, her voice dripping with pure irritation. "I am not yelling," I replied, trying to keep my composure. "I am sitting in my wedding dress. Your chairs are empty. Where are you and Dad right now?" She let out a dramatic sigh, the exact kind she always used when I was being an inconvenience to her life. "We are not coming, Madeline. Brittany is having a massive crisis right now, and she needs her family by her side. We cannot just abandon her because you decided to throw a party today. A crisis." My 30-year-old sister, who did not have a job and spent her days pretending to be a wealthy lifestyle influencer on the internet, was having a crisis on my wedding day. What kind of crisis? I asked, the cold reality settling deep in my chest. Did someone die? Is she in the hospital? "No," my mother scoffed, sounding deeply offended by my total lack of empathy. "She is going through severe emotional distress. She is having a total meltdown over everything right now. She feels overshadowed by all the attention you are demanding today. You have always been jealous of your sister's sensitive nature, Madeline. You never consider how your flashy lifestyle impacts her mental health. We are at a car dealership trying to calm her down. Do not bother us anymore today." Click. She hung up the phone. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who used you for their own personal financial gain constantly. I stood there in my custom gown staring at my reflection. For 3 solid years, I had transferred $5,000 into my parents' joint checking account on the first of every single month. I paid off their mortgage entirely. I funded their lavish vacations. I did it because I wanted to be the good daughter. I did it because they constantly reminded me that I owed them for raising me. And yet, on the most important day of my entire life, they chose to console my spoiled sister over a fabricated tantrum at a luxury car dealership downtown instead. They chose her instead of watching me get married. The emotional coldness I had grown up with came rushing back. I remembered every birthday they forgot. I was done being their backup plan and their personal bank. I did not cry. My tears dried up completely. A strange calm clarity washed over me. I sat down on the velvet chair. I unlocked my phone and opened my banking application. I navigated to the family management section. There it was, the supplemental American Express card I had issued in my father's name. I firmly pressed the lock card button and smiled. I walked out of that bridal suite and down the aisle with my head held high. I did not need my parents to give me away today. I had built my own company from the ground up, and I could walk myself down the long aisle. Ethan looked incredibly handsome standing there waiting for me. When he saw that I was walking alone, his dark eyes softened with deep understanding. He reached out, gently took my hands in his, and whispered that he loved me. The ceremony was beautiful. We exchanged our vows under a canopy of white roses, promising to protect each other against anything the world threw our way. The officiant finally pronounced us husband and wife. Just as Ethan leaned in and kissed me, my phone, tucked carefully into the hidden pocket of my wedding gown, began to vibrate frantically. It buzzed once, twice, then continuously in a rapid sequence. It was an emergency override ring. We pulled away from the kiss, smiling at our cheering guests, but I immediately stepped to the side of the floral arch. I pulled the phone out. The screen flashed with my father's name, Richard. 20 minutes had passed since I locked the credit card. I accepted the call and lifted it to my ear. Before I could even say a single word, a barrage of screaming erupted through the speaker. "Madeline, what in the absolute hell is wrong with you?" my father roared. His voice was echoing, and in the background I could hear the distinct polished hum of a luxury car showroom. I am standing at the financing desk of a high-end dealership, and the sales manager just humiliated me. He cut the supplementary American Express card in half. He literally cut it in half right in front of Brittany and a lobby full of customers. My sister's so-called emotional crisis suddenly made perfect sense. She was not crying over her mental health. She was throwing a massive temper tantrum because she wanted a brand new car. "Are you at a Porsche dealership right now?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Of course we are," Richard yelled, completely lacking any sense of shame. "Brittany was feeling incredibly depressed this morning. Seeing all your wealthy friends posting about your extravagant wedding made her feel terribly inadequate about her own lifestyle brand. She needed a quick pick-me-up. We brought her here to lease a brand new Porsche Macan so she could do a photo shoot for her followers. It was the only way to get her to stop crying. And when the dealer ran the card for the $20,000 down payment, it declined. Turn it back on right now. You are embarrassing this family." I stood frozen, staring out at my wedding guests, enjoying the champagne reception. My parents skipped my wedding so they could use my money to buy my 30-year-old sister a luxury SUV to upstage my big day on social media. "I am not turning the card back on Dad," I said firmly. "That money was for your groceries and your medical bills, not to fund her fake influencer lifestyle. I just got married 5 minutes ago. Do not ever call me for money again. You owe us this, Madeline," he screamed back, his voice cracking with rage. "You selfishly refused to pay for your sister's college tuition when your startup took off. You abandoned your family responsibilities. Because of you, she had to drop out and struggle. You owe her this car." The sheer audacity took my breath away. I was never obligated to pay her tuition. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school while they bought her designer clothes. "I am cutting you off," I replied, my tone icy and resolute. "The $5,000 a month stops today. The credit cards are permanently canceled. You and Mom need to figure out your own finances from now on." The line went completely dead silent for a few long seconds. I thought he might have hung up out of pure shock, but then a low, menacing growl came through the speaker. His voice dropped the frantic yelling and became dangerously cold. "You listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful little brat," Richard snarled. "You think you hold all the power because you have a fancy title and a big bank account. You think you can just cut us off and leave us completely humiliated. Unlock that card right this second and authorize the down payment immediately. If you do not unlock it now, you can kiss that suburban house you let us live in goodbye. I know exactly how to take it from you, and I will not hesitate to ruin you permanently. Consider this your final warning." I ended the call and blocked his number. Ethan placed a warm hand on my shoulder, his eyes searching my face for any sign of a breakdown. But there was no breakdown. I told him what my father had threatened, and we agreed that my parents were bluffing. They had no legal right to the house. I bought it. My name was on the deed. 2 days later, we were stepping off a plane into the warm air of Maui, Hawaii. I was determined not to let their toxic behavior ruin my honeymoon. For 48 hours, it was pure paradise. We swam in the ocean, ate fresh seafood, and enjoyed the peace of finally being husband and wife, away from the suffocating grip of my family. But peace is fragile when you are related to people who thrive on chaos. On the third morning, we were sitting on the balcony of our oceanfront suite, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. I turned my phone off airplane mode to check my work email. The device instantly froze as a tidal wave of notifications flooded the screen. Ping after ping echoed against the sound of the crashing waves below. I had 57 unread text messages, mostly from extended family members I had not spoken to in years. I opened the first text from my Aunt Brenda. "How could you do this to your own sister?" the message read. "You are a greedy, selfish monster." I scrolled to the next message from my Uncle Greg. "We always knew you were a problem child, Madeline. You ruined Thanksgiving when you were 16, and now you have ruined your family forever. Pay your sister back, right now." My heart began to race. I had no idea what they were talking about. Ethan moved his chair closer, his brow furrowed in concern as he read the hateful messages over my shoulder. "Check social media," he suggested quietly. I opened my Facebook application, and there it was sitting right at the top of my feed. My mother had posted a 10-minute video late last night. She was sitting on the beige couch in the living room of the house I paid for, clutching a tissue and crying hysterically into the camera lens. I tapped the screen to play the video. Her voice cracked with fabricated sorrow as she addressed her hundreds of friends and our entire extended family. "I am completely heartbroken to share this," my mother sobbed, dabbing at her dry eyes. "Our oldest daughter, Madeline, has done something unforgivable. We trusted her with Brittany's life savings. Brittany has been working so hard on her lifestyle brand, saving every penny. But Madeline drained the entire account to pay for her extravagant, tacky wedding. And when we confronted her, she cut us off completely and abandoned the family." I felt sick. The sheer magnitude of the lie was breathtaking. My mother was weaponizing our entire extended family against me to cover up the fact that they tried to buy a luxury car with my money. The comments section under the video was a cesspool of hatred. Cousins, family friends, and neighbors were calling for my arrest. They were dragging my name through the mud, calling me a thief and a fraud. This was their classic playbook. Whenever I stood up for myself, I suddenly became the villain. They painted me as the rebellious, troubled child who was always jealous of Brittany's shining light. They brought up old stories from my childhood, twisting every memory to make me look unhinged. I was shaking with anger, my thumb hovering over the reply button, ready to defend myself and post the bank statements proving I was the one funding their existence. "Do not engage with them," Ethan said firmly, gently, pulling the phone away from my trembling fingers. "If you argue in the comments, you give them exactly what they want. You give them a public spectacle and play right into their hands." I knew he was absolutely right. Engaging with narcissists in a public forum is always a losing battle. I took a deep breath and closed the application, trying to calm my racing heart. Just as I carefully set the heavy phone down on the glass table, the screen lit up with a single silent notification. It was not an iMessage or a regular text. It was an encrypted message sent through a secure application I rarely used. The sender was an unknown number, but the opening line told me exactly who it was from. It was Jamal, Brittany's husband, and my brother-in-law. The message was incredibly brief. "Do not reply to this," the text read. "Just check the title on your suburban property right now." They did not just buy a car. I stared at the glowing screen of my mobile phone, the incredibly cryptic words burning themselves deeply into my retinas. The incredibly heavy implications of Jamal's dark warning hung in the warm Hawaiian air, completely shattering the brief peace we had found. My husband Ethan did not hesitate for a single second. He immediately jumped up from his lounge chair and went straight into the hotel suite. He emerged a moment later, carrying his silver laptop, his expression transformed from relaxed husband to focused corporate tax attorney. He set the computer down on the glass balcony table and quickly booted it up. He connected to the secure virtual private network he used for his law firm and opened the browser. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I am accessing the county real estate database for your home state," Ethan replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced speed. "Property records are public information. If your parents did something to the house, it will be recorded right here." I pulled my chair closer to his, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I watched as he typed in the address of the suburban house I had purchased 4 years ago. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom property with a wraparound porch. I bought it solely under my name, but I allowed my parents to live there rent-free. The database loaded a long page of complex legal documents and transaction histories. Ethan scrolled past the initial deed of sale and stopped abruptly. His jaw tightened. He clicked on a document filed just 48 hours ago, the exact day of our wedding. Madeline, Ethan said, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Your parents did not just try to lease a luxury vehicle. They took out a home equity line of credit against your property. A HELOC. For $150,000. The air rushed out of my lungs as if I had been physically struck. I leaned in, staring at the digital scan of the legal document. There at the bottom of the page was my signature, but it was slightly shaky, an awkward imitation of my handwriting. How is that even possible? I demanded, my hands gripping the edge of the table. The bank would need my physical presence. They would need my social security number, my driver's license, my tax records. How could they bypass all of that security? Then the sickening realization washed over me. I closed my eyes as a deeply repressed memory surfaced. When I turned 18 and prepared to leave for college, my mother insisted on keeping my original birth certificate, my social security card, and a color copy of my driver's license. She claimed it was for safekeeping in her metal lockbox, arguing that a young adult in a dorm room was too irresponsible to hold on to such vital government documents. "They kept them," I whispered, opening my eyes to look at Ethan. "They kept my identity documents. They must have used them to apply for the loan online, bypassing the need to appear in person by exploiting the digital verification systems. They forged my signature." "This is not just toxic family drama anymore," Ethan stated firmly, his eyes locking onto mine. "This is felony identity theft and federal wire fraud. Your parents just committed major financial crimes. They essentially stole $150,000 of equity straight out of your pocket to fund your sister's lifestyle." I felt a cold wave of pure fury replace the initial shock. They hated me, yet they felt completely entitled to steal my hard-earned assets. "We need to track where that money went immediately," Ethan said, opening a new tab. "Because you are the legal owner of the property, and technically the primary account holder of this fraudulent loan, we can verify the disbursement." He guided me through the process of logging into my primary credit monitoring service, using my social security number to pull the fresh data. A new account had indeed been opened at a major national bank. Ethan bypassed the main screen and accessed the transaction history. The interface loaded with a bright green banner indicating the account was active. The starting balance showed the full $150,000. But as the page automatically refreshed, a sudden real-time notification flashed across the top right corner of the screen. We both stared at the transaction ledger in stunned silence. A wire transfer had just been initiated. Exactly $140,000 was currently moving out of the account. It was not going to a car dealership. The destination routing number belonged to an offshore account tied directly to a high-risk cryptocurrency betting platform. We did not spend another second staring at that screen. The tropical paradise outside our window suddenly felt like a prison. We packed our heavy bags in complete silence, leaving our dream honeymoon a full week early. Ethan managed to secure 2 seats on the next red-eye flight back to the mainland. During the long, grueling 9-hour journey, neither of us slept. I spent the entire flight organizing the printed bank statements, wire transfer logs, and the forged home equity line of credit documents into a thick manila folder. My parents had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had stolen my identity, mortgaged my property, and funneled the cash to my sister's illegal gambling habits. When we finally landed, we did not go to our apartment. Ethan drove our rental car straight to the suburban house I had generously allowed my parents to live in. As we turned onto their very quiet tree-lined street, I noticed dozens of expensive cars parked tightly along the curb. Loud music drifted through the air, mixing with the smell of expensive grilled meats. My parents were throwing a massive backyard barbecue party for the entire neighborhood. We walked up the paved driveway and let ourselves through the wooden side gate. The scene before me made my blood boil. The backyard was decorated with elaborate floral arrangements and catered food stations. It was a lavish display of wealth funded entirely by the money they had just stolen in my name. Standing at the center of the patio was my sister Brittany. She was holding a crystal champagne flute and wearing a designer silk dress that easily cost $2,000. A crowd of wealthy neighbors surrounded her, hanging onto every word. She tossed her perfect blonde hair and laughed loudly. "I am just a self-made entrepreneur," Brittany announced to the mesmerized crowd, her voice carrying over the music. "Building my lifestyle brand took endless nights of hard work and severe financial discipline. But when you are truly dedicated to your craft, success naturally follows." I could not stomach another second of her pathetic lies. I pushed my way through the crowd of neighbors, my tailored travel suit a sharp contrast to their casual summer wear. Ethan stayed close right behind me, his presence a solid wall of support. The neighbors parted their smiles, fading into confused whispers as they recognized me. The ungrateful daughter who had supposedly ruined the family. I walked straight up to the massive catered buffet table where Brittany was holding court. She stopped talking mid-sentence, her eyes widening in genuine shock. "Madeline," she stammered, her champagne flute trembling slightly. "You are supposed to be in Hawaii." I ignored her entirely. I opened the thick manila folder I had carried across the Pacific Ocean. I pulled out the freshly printed wire transfer logs, highlighting the $140,000 sent to the offshore cryptocurrency casino. I slammed the heavy stack of papers down right into the center of the large crystal bowl of potato salad on the buffet table. Mayonnaise and mustard splattered across the table. The music suddenly seemed deafening in the dead silence of the stunned crowd. "There is your self-made entrepreneur," I said loudly, making sure every single neighbor heard me. "She builds her brand by having our parents forge my signature on a bank loan and wiring the equity to an offshore betting platform." The neighbors gasped, taking sudden steps away from the table. I turned my head, expecting to see sheer panic on my mother's face. I expected her to deny it or burst into her usual theatrical tears. But Patricia did not flinch. She stood near the grill holding a pair of silver tongs, and an icy smirk slowly spread across her face. She did not look like a woman who had just been caught committing federal fraud. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for this exact moment. She calmly set the tongs down and gave a subtle nod to my father. Richard stepped forward from the shadows of the patio awning. He did not look angry. He looked triumphant. He reached inside his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick, officially sealed legal document, and shoved it hard against my chest. I looked down at the dense stack of papers pressed roughly against my hands. The official county court seal glared back at me in the bright afternoon sunlight. They were actually trying to legally frame me for the exact crime they had just committed themselves. My father laughed maliciously, enjoying the silent crowd. "We have the best lawyer in the state," he whispered. "Consider yourself served, Madeline." My father sneered loudly. It was an official court summons for elder financial abuse. I stared down at the thick legal document resting heavily in my hands, the words "elder financial abuse" printed boldly across the top page. Before I could even process the absolute absurdity of the accusation, my father turned to face the crowd of neighbors. He raised his hands in a dramatic gesture of surrender, playing the role of the victimized patriarch perfectly. "Look at what my own daughter has driven us to," Richard announced loudly, making sure his voice carried over the quiet murmurs of the stunned guests. "We gave her everything, and how does she repay us?" She takes out a massive $150,000 loan against the house we live in to fund her failing technology startup company. And now that she has squandered all the money, she is trying to frame her elderly parents for the debt to save her own skin. It is a classic case of projection, my mother chimed in, wiping a completely fake tear from her eye. We just wanted to host a nice barbecue to celebrate Brittany and her hard work. But Madeline could not stand to see her sister shining. She had to come here and ruin it, just like she ruins everything. The crowd of affluent suburban neighbors shifted uncomfortably, but I could hear their hushed whispers drifting through the humid summer air. That is exactly what Patricia told us about her, a woman in a floral sundress muttered to her husband. She said Madeline was a sociopath who only cared about money. I remembered that woman. She was the neighborhood association president. For an entire decade, my mother had systematically fed these people twisted stories about my character, painting me as a ruthless, unfeeling monster, while elevating Brittany to the status of a living saint. They had laid the groundwork for this character assassination long before I even arrived. They knew that if they repeated a lie enough times, the neighborhood would eventually accept it as the absolute truth. I looked around at the faces of the people I had known since I was a teenager. Not a single person stepped forward to defend me. Not a single person questioned how an elderly couple could suddenly afford an extravagant catered party on a fixed income. They were completely under my parents' spell. I felt Ethan shift his weight beside me, his protective instinct flaring. He reached out and gently took the court summons from my trembling hands, scanning the legal jargon with his highly trained eyes. "This is a completely baseless intimidation tactic," Ethan stated firmly, his deep voice cutting easily through the neighborhood gossips. "Anyone with basic financial literacy can easily trace the wire transfers straight to your offshore accounts." But logic meant absolutely nothing to this crowd. They wanted a show, and my family was giving them a master class in manipulation. Brittany stepped away from the buffet table, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. She walked slowly toward me, the silk fabric of her ridiculously expensive dress rustling with every single step. She stopped just inches away from my face, her perfectly manicured nails glinting brightly in the afternoon sunlight. She reached out and mockingly patted my cheek, treating me like an incredibly naive child who had just thrown a stupid tantrum. "You really thought you could come here and make a big scene, Madeline?" Brittany whispered, her voice low enough that only Ethan and I could hear the pure venom hiding in her tone. "You always think you are the smartest person in the entire room, but you forgot one crucial detail. If you do not turn that credit card back on right now, and if you do not keep paying that $5,000 every single month, we are going straight to the police with our lawyer." I angrily swatted her hand away from my face, my eyes narrowing with intense disgust. "You have absolutely zero leverage over me, Brittany," I replied, my voice perfectly steady despite the raging anger boiling inside my chest. "You cannot report a crime that you committed yourself. I own this property. I will simply sell it and leave you all with absolutely nothing." Brittany threw her head back and let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed across the stone patio. Her eyes sparkled with malicious delight as she prepared to deliver her final, devastating blow. "You really have no idea what is actually going on, do you?" she sneered, leaning in dangerously close to my face. "You cannot sell this property, Madeline, because you do not own it anymore. Mom and Dad transferred the entire deed over to my name last month. This is my house now, and there is absolutely nothing that you or your new lawyer husband can ever do about it." I gripped the ridiculous court summons in my hand, the thick paper crumpling slightly under the pressure of my tight fist. I did not scream, cry, or plead my case to the affluent neighbors who had already convicted me. Ethan guided me through the whispering guests and out the wooden gate. The heavy bass of the backyard music faded as we reached the tree-lined street where our rental car was parked. The humid summer air felt incredibly heavy, pressing down on my chest as the reality of my parents' immense betrayal truly set in. They were not just stealing from me. They were actively trying to destroy my freedom and my reputation. As we approached our vehicle, I stopped dead in my tracks. Someone was leaning against the driver's side door of our car. It was Jamal, my brother. He wore a sharp gray suit that stood out from the casual barbecue attire. He looked incredibly calm, his dark eyes observing us with a calculating intelligence. I immediately felt a surge of defensive anger, assuming he had been sent out here by my sister to deliver another threat. I opened my mouth to speak, but he raised a hand. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, solid black USB drive. He held it out toward me, the small metal device catching the bright afternoon sunlight. I stared at it completely confused, but Ethan instinctively stepped forward and took the drive from Jamal's outstretched hand. "What is this?" I asked, my voice tight with lingering adrenaline and suspicion. "This is the exact reason I sent you that encrypted text message in Hawaii," Jamal replied, his deep voice smooth and incredibly steady. "I am done, Madeline. I am completely and utterly done with this entire family." I looked at him closely. For the 5 years he had been married to my sister, Jamal had always been the quiet observer in the background. My parents treated him appallingly. They constantly made passive-aggressive comments about his background, assigned him manual labor tasks during family holidays like he was their hired help, and completely dismissed his highly lucrative career. Because he was an African-American man who did not come from a wealthy trust fund family, they viewed him as entirely inferior. They willfully ignored the fact that he was an elite information technology security expert who consulted for massive corporate firms downtown. They thought he was just a tech support guy they could order around to fix their wireless routers. "I am sick of the constant disrespect," Jamal continued, his jaw tightening as he spoke. "I am sick of your father calling me boy when he thinks I cannot hear him. I am sick of your mother asking me to carry her heavy luggage while she praises the white neighbors for just breathing. But mostly I am sick of watching them destroy anyone who does not bow down to their golden child." So I decided to do what I actually do best for a living. I conducted a comprehensive security audit of their entire digital footprint. He gestured toward the small black USB drive resting in Ethan's palm. "I hacked your father's laptop last night. It was incredibly easy. His password was literally Brittany's birth year. Everything you need to completely dismantle their fabricated elder abuse case is right there on that drive. Unedited PDF files, original emails to their sleazy attorney, hidden offshore routing numbers, and the digital footprints of them forging your electronic signature for the bank loan. They think they are master criminals, but they left a digital trail a mile wide." I felt a sudden massive wave of relief wash over me. Jamal was handing me the exact ammunition I needed to fight back and win. "Thank you, Jamal," I whispered, truly, meaning it. "This changes absolutely everything." He shook his head slowly, his expression turning incredibly grim. "It changes things, but you do not know the worst part yet," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "I did not just find the forged deed and the bank loan documents. I found out exactly why Brittany needed that money so desperately. You thought she was just funding her fake lifestyle brand or playing on offshore crypto casinos. She is, but she has been losing massively." He took a step closer, looking up and down the quiet suburban street to ensure nobody was listening. "Brittany did not just forge the deed to your house. She owes over $100,000 to a very dangerous illegal gambling syndicate operating out of the city. And they just sent her an encrypted message this morning. They are threatening to come to this exact house tonight to collect their debt." I stared at Jamal in absolute horror as the sheer gravity of his words washed over me. An illegal gambling syndicate was coming to my property tonight to collect a massive debt. My parents were throwing a lavish party in the backyard, completely oblivious to the violent threat descending upon them. Or perhaps they thought their affluent neighborhood status would magically protect them from real-world consequences. I thanked Jamal again and quickly climbed into the passenger seat of our rental car. Ethan slid behind the steering wheel and immediately grabbed his silver laptop from the back seat. My hands were shaking as I took the sleek black USB drive from him and plugged it directly into the side port of his computer. A file folder popped up on the screen instantly. Jamal had meticulously organized everything into neat digital directories. I clicked on a folder labeled legal correspondence. Inside, there were dozens of exported email threads between my father and a prominent local attorney known for handling extremely aggressive estate litigation. I opened the most recent email thread dated just 3 weeks ago. As I began reading the text on the bright screen, all the blood completely drained from my face. They were not just trying to steal my house or saddle me with a fraudulent loan. They were actively building a comprehensive legal case to place me under a permanent conservatorship. My heart hammered violently against my ribs as I read through my father's meticulously typed lies. He was formally requesting the court to strip away all my personal and financial rights, comparing my situation directly to high-profile celebrity cases. He claimed I was a danger to myself and entirely incapable of managing my own substantial assets. I scrolled down to an attached medical affidavit drafted by my mother. Patricia had written a highly detailed and entirely fabricated account of my mental health history. She claimed that I had suffered a severe nervous breakdown when I was 19 years old. Reading her twisted words made my chest tighten with a suffocating familiar pain. There was no nervous breakdown. When I was 19, they abruptly kicked me out of the house in the middle of winter simply because I refused to hand over my college scholarship money to pay for Brittany's expensive European vacation. I spent 2 months sleeping on a friend's worn-out couch, struggling with deep depression and the profound grief of being discarded by my own family. I was a heartbroken teenager trying to survive cold nights and heavy college coursework. But now, Patricia was weaponizing my lowest, most vulnerable moment, framing my temporary sadness as a permanent, crippling psychiatric disorder. To me, it was a completely calculated, cold-blooded assassination of my character, designed entirely for financial gain. I clicked on the final attachment in the email thread. It was a drafted petition for the court, outlining the specific assets they intended to seize control over once I was deemed mentally unfit. They did not just want the suburban house. They explicitly listed my data analytics startup company, a business I owned 100%. I had built that company from absolute scratch in my tiny studio apartment, working 100-hour weeks while eating cheap ramen noodles. I had just secured a massive round of venture capital funding that valued the business at over $10 million. My parents, who had actively mocked my entrepreneurial dreams and told me I was wasting my life, were now plotting a hostile legal takeover to steal my entire life's work. They planned to install my unemployed sister, a woman who could not even manage a basic credit card, as the acting chief executive officer of my own company. For a brief moment, I could not even breathe. The interior walls of the rental car felt like they were rapidly closing in on me. The sheer evil of their dark plan was beyond anything I had ever imagined. They actually wanted to lock me away in a legal cage and drain every single drop of blood I had sweated to build my independent life. I turned the laptop screen toward Ethan so he could read the petition himself. I watched as his eyes quickly scanned the legal jargon. The warm, loving husband who had just married me in a beautiful botanical garden completely vanished. His jaw locked tightly, and his dark brown eyes turned dangerously cold. He slowly closed the bright laptop screen with a sharp, decisive snap that echoed loudly in the quiet car. He firmly gripped the leather steering wheel, his large knuckles turning completely white under the intense physical pressure. "They want a legal war," Ethan asked softly, his deep voice vibrating with a terrifying, calculated rage. "I'm going to absolutely bury them all." Ethan started the rental car engine, and we sped out of the pristine suburban neighborhood. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. My mind was racing. My instinct was to dial emergency services and hand over all the digital evidence Jamal had just provided. I wanted to see police cruisers pull up to the lavish barbecue and drag my parents out in shiny handcuffs. But looking at Ethan, whose jaw was locked in absolute concentration, I realized calling the authorities right now would be a massive mistake. The justice system moves incredibly slowly. If we handed this over to a detective, my parents would hire their sleazy attorney post-bail immediately and drag the process out for years. they would still have access to the stolen funds and continue their campaign to destroy my business and reputation. We needed a strategy that was much faster and far more devastating. We needed to hit them where it would hurt the most, completely severing their financial lifelines before they even realized what was happening. We drove straight back to our apartment in the city. The moment we walked through the door, we transformed our dining room table into a makeshift war room. I opened my laptop and immediately got to work. Growing up, my parents constantly criticized my intense ambition. Whenever I stayed up late studying the stock market or reading complex business strategy books, my mother would shake her head in deep disappointment. She frequently told me that my aggressive drive was entirely unladylike. She insisted that women should be soft, agreeable, and focused on finding a wealthy husband, exactly like my sister Brittany was trained to do. They mocked my early startup struggles, calling my tech company a cute little hobby that would inevitably fail. They never understood that building a successful data analytics firm from the ground up required a level of absolute ruthlessness. I had to learn how to outmaneuver massive corporate competitors, negotiate incredibly hostile contracts, and completely crush any obstacles in my way. Now, I was going to use every single one of those unladylike business tactics to dismantle my own toxic family. Ethan sat across from me, pulling up the Delaware State Corporate Registry portal. Delaware has incredibly fast corporate formation laws and offers anonymity for business owners. Within 2 hours, using a registered agent service and an expedited filing fee, we legally formed a brand new limited liability company. We named it Apex Holdings. By midnight, Apex Holdings was a fully registered legal entity with its own secure bank account funded directly from my personal startup dividends. Now it was time to execute the most crucial phase of our plan. Ethan examined the forged home equity line of credit documents from Jamal's flash drive. The loan was not issued by a traditional massive national bank. Because my parents needed the cash immediately to cover Brittany's massive gambling debts, they had used a smaller, aggressive private lending firm that specialized in high-risk, fast-approval mortgages. I found the contact information for the firm's chief risk officer and sent a highly urgent, legally binding notification. I attached the undeniable digital proof that the loan was secured through felony identity theft and forged signatures. I clearly explained that, as the true legal owner of the property, I was preparing to file a massive federal lawsuit against their lending firm for failing to conduct basic identity verification. I knew exactly how these private financial institutions operated. They absolutely hated drawn-out legal battles and federal regulatory scrutiny. A fraudulent loan of this size on their active books was a massive liability that could completely ruin their quarterly financial reports. Within 30 minutes, my phone rang. It was the frantic lending executive. He practically begged me not to involve the federal authorities. I let him sweat for a few moments before offering my exceptionally cold compromise. Instead of a lawsuit, I offered to have my new corporate entity, Apex Holdings, purchase the fraudulent debt directly from their firm. Because the loan was now legally classified as highly toxic and compromised by fraud, I offered to buy the entire $150,000 debt portfolio for pennies on the dollar. The executive agreed instantly, eager to wipe the total mess off his corporate ledger. Ethan quickly drafted the assignment of debt contract. By the time the sun began to rise over the city skyline, the electronic transfer was completely finalized. My parents thought they had cleverly stolen my equity to save their golden child. But they had absolutely no idea what had just happened in the dark. I was no longer just their discarded daughter. I was now the sole owner of Apex Holdings, which meant I was officially their legal loan shark. The morning sun broke through the tall windows of our apartment, casting long shadows across the dining room table that had become our legal war room. I was officially the owner of my parents' fraudulent debt, holding the absolute power to foreclose on the property whenever I chose. But I needed physical proof of the forged deed transfer to ensure my legal victory was entirely bulletproof before proceeding further. That was when my encrypted messaging application chimed softly. It was Jamal. He was currently inside the suburban house acting as our ultimate Trojan horse. Since the disastrous backyard barbecue, my parents had grown incredibly paranoid, installing high-end security cameras in every single room. They did not trust anyone yet. Ironically, they tasked Jamal with managing the entire network simply because he was the resident computer expert they could order around for free, completely ignoring his actual professional credentials. Jamal sent a quick text explaining his immediate plan. He intentionally introduced a massive looping error into the home wireless network, causing the security cameras in my father's home office to completely freeze. To anyone else, it just looked like a standard internet service provider outage. With the digital eyes temporarily blinded, Jamal slipped quietly into the dark wood-paneled office. He knew exactly where Richard kept his heavy steel floor safe, hidden beneath an expensive Persian rug. My father was incredibly predictable, always using the same simple 4-digit code for everything. It was Brittany's birth year, a constant reminder of who truly mattered in that household. Jamal quickly punched in the numbers, and the heavy metal door clicked open smoothly. He pulled out a thick stack of manila folders, his phone camera flashing silently as he captured clear, high-resolution images of the entire forged property deed, the fake notary stamps, and a handwritten ledger detailing the illicit offshore wire transfers. He was just returning the documents to their original place and spinning the combination dial when the heavy office door suddenly swung wide open. Richard stood in the doorway, his face instantly twisting into a deeply suspicious scowl. "What exactly are you doing in here, sneaking around my private property?" my father demanded, his voice laced with absolute contempt and irrational anger. Jamal did not flinch or panic. He calmly stood up, holding a tangled handful of Ethernet cables he had grabbed from the desk. "The wireless router is dropping packets again," Richard Jamal replied smoothly, maintaining a perfectly polite tone. "I am just trying to reset the main access point so you can watch your premium streaming channels without buffering." My father scoffed loudly, stepping fully into the room and looking at Jamal with sheer disgust. He looked at Jamal's casual clothing and shook his head in bitter disappointment. "You are always lingering around my house, eating my expensive food and messing with the wires. I swear you people are all exactly the same, always looking for a free ride off the backs of hard-working, respectable families. You should be down on your knees thanking me every single day that I allowed my beautiful daughter to marry a freeloader from your side of the tracks." He made sure to emphasize the phrase, "your people," a thinly veiled racist comment designed entirely to humiliate Jamal and remind him of his supposed inferior status in their elite social circle. Any other man would have snapped and punched Richard right in his arrogant jaw, but Jamal was a highly trained security professional who deeply understood the immense value of maintaining absolute ultimate leverage over his enemies. He simply smiled politely, nodded his head respectfully, and quietly excused himself from the highly tense office environment. He walked straight out to his vehicle parked securely in the driveway, locked the heavy doors, and immediately opened our secure communication channel. My phone buzzed loudly on the wooden dining room table, breaking the thick silence in our apartment. Ethan and I leaned in close together to meticulously read the incoming transmission. Jamal sent over 40 high-resolution images of the forged legal documents and the incredibly damning handwritten financial ledger detailing every stolen dollar. I downloaded the vital files directly to our secure cloud server, making sure we had multiple encrypted backups stored safely away from their reach. Then a second critical text message unexpectedly appeared on my bright screen. "I have the physical ledger securely documented." Jamal wrote his digital text carrying a strong sense of impending doom. "And by the way, they just sent out very expensive heavy cardstock invitations in the mail early this very morning. They are hosting a massive and lavish Thanksgiving dinner event next week. They are planning to publicly announce Brittany as the sole new owner of your house in front of the entire wealthy neighborhood." I stared at the bright screen of my mobile phone, the digital words from Jamal burning intensely into my mind. They were hosting a massive Thanksgiving dinner to publicly announce Brittany as the sole new owner of my suburban house. I showed the encrypted message to Ethan. He leaned back in his heavy wooden dining chair, a slow, highly predatory smile spreading across his handsome face. "They are handing us the absolute perfect stage," Ethan said softly, his deep voice practically purring with dark anticipation. "If they want a very public spectacle, we should absolutely give them one." I knew exactly what needed to be done next. To make our ultimate trap work flawlessly, my parents needed to feel completely invincible. They needed to believe they had successfully broken my spirit and won the war. I picked up my mobile phone and navigated to my blocked contacts list. I unblocked my mother's cell phone number and took a long, deep breath to prepare myself. I needed to channel every single ounce of acting ability I possessed. I closed my eyes, remembering the profound helplessness I felt when I was 19 years old, shivering on a cold couch after they threw me out of the house. I let that old familiar pain squeeze my chest until genuine tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I hit the call button. The line rang 3 times before Patricia finally answered. She did not say hello. "What do you want?" Madeline, my mother, demanded, her voice dripping with absolute icy contempt. I let out a loud, shuddering sob directly into the receiver. "Mom, please," I cried, making my voice tremble and crack with fabricated desperation. "Please, I am so incredibly sorry. I was completely wrong to come to the barbecue and make a massive scene. Please do not move forward with the legal conservatorship. I will do whatever you want." The silence on the other end of the line was incredibly thick. I could practically hear Patricia swelling with immense narcissistic pride. She thrived on this exact dynamic. She lived for the moments when she held absolute power over me. "I always knew you would eventually come crawling back, Madeline." Patricia said, her tone shifting from anger to a sickeningly sweet, condescending purr. "You have always been completely unstable and entirely incapable of surviving without our guidance. We were only trying to protect you from yourself by taking over your company. You need us to manage your life." I let out another pathetic whimper, forcing myself to sound utterly defeated. "I know, Mom," I whispered weakly. "I will keep paying the $5,000 every single month. I will authorize the down payment for the luxury car. Just please let me come to the Thanksgiving dinner to apologize to everyone and make amends." Patricia let out a soft, victorious chuckle. "Fine," she agreed, her voice practically dripping with arrogant superiority. "You may attend the holiday dinner, but you will not cause any trouble. You will wear something incredibly plain, so you do not upstage your sister on her big day. And you will sit quietly at the small corner table in the dining room, exactly like you used to when you were a difficult teenager. You will watch Brittany receive the deed to the house, and you will smile politely. You will not speak to any of the important investors or wealthy neighbors. You will remain entirely invisible until we specifically address you," she added firmly. "Do you understand me?" "Yes, Mom, I understand completely," I replied, making sure to sound thoroughly broken. "I will see you on Thursday," Patricia said coldly, and then she abruptly disconnected the call. The dial tone echoed in the quiet dining room. I slowly lowered the mobile phone from my ear and placed it gently on the wooden table. The tears instantly dried up. The trembling completely vanished. My face turned to absolute stone. I had given them exactly what they wanted, the complete illusion of total and absolute victory. Ethan stood up from his chair and walked around the table to stand beside me. He leaned down and pressed a warm, reassuring kiss to my forehead. Then he reached into his leather briefcase, resting on the nearby chair. He pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder and gently placed it onto the table right in front of me. The folder was completely sealed and officially stamped by the federal authorities. I looked down at the bold black letters neatly printed across the front cover. It read, "Foreclosure and IRS subpoenas." I ran my fingers over the very smooth paper, a genuine cold smile finally touching my lips. The ultimate trap was now fully set and completely ready to be sprung wide open on Thanksgiving Day without fail. After sealing the foreclosure folder, we turned our attention back to the glowing laptop screen. We had secured the trap for my parents, but we still needed to deal with my sister. I double-clicked on the final encrypted folder Jamal had managed to extract from the heavy steel floor safe. It was simply labeled with Brittany's name. For years, I had been forced to sit at family gatherings and listen to her brag endlessly about her incredible success. She constantly belittled my tech startup, calling me a boring office drone who wasted her youth staring at spreadsheets. She claimed her lavish lifestyle was funded by massive brand deals and highly lucrative influencer contracts. My parents treated her like a modern business genius while treating my legitimate company as an embarrassing hobby. But as Ethan and I opened the digital ledgers inside the folder, the shiny illusion of her perfect life shattered. There were absolutely no brand deals. There were no corporate sponsorships or legitimate marketing contracts. Brittany's entire lifestyle brand was nothing more than a sophisticated front for massive financial crimes. I scrolled through page after page of highly detailed transaction logs. The illegal gambling syndicate that she owed $100,000 to was not just a group she placed bets with. She was actively helping them wash their dirty money. The ledgers showed hundreds of fake invoices generated by her supposed lifestyle company. She would receive massive wire transfers from offshore accounts, claim them as advertising revenue on her tax returns, take a percentage cut for herself to buy designer clothes, and then funnel the rest of the clean money back into the syndicate's domestic shell companies. It was textbook money laundering combined with severe federal tax evasion and wire fraud. She had built her arrogant persona on highly illegal activities. The sheer audacity of her crimes left me completely breathless. She had spent years looking down on my hard work, while essentially acting as a glorified bank teller for organized criminals. I looked over at Ethan. His eyes were scanning the complex financial spreadsheets with the intense, focused precision of a highly trained predator. As a corporate tax attorney, he spent his entire professional career dismantling fraudulent financial structures exactly like this one. He did not say a single word. He simply opened his encrypted professional email client and began drafting a highly detailed, incredibly formal message. I watched his fingers fly across the keyboard as he meticulously outlined the entire money laundering operation, citing specific offshore routing numbers, fake domestic entities, and dates of the fraudulent wire transfers. He attached all the damning high-resolution images of the physical ledger that Jamal risked everything to photograph from my father's hidden safe. "Who exactly are you emailing right now?" I asked softly, watching him attach the final encrypted zip file to the outgoing message. Ethan did not look up from the bright screen. Before I started working in the wealthy private sector, I spent 4 long years as a federal prosecutor. He replied, his voice completely calm and devoid of any mercy. "I still have several very close contacts who currently work as senior field agents for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. They absolutely live for airtight cases like this. Tax evasion is the one crime the federal government will never ignore. They took down infamous mobsters for unpaid taxes when they could not prove anything else, and they will absolutely tear your sister apart for this." He carefully reviewed the lengthy email one last time, ensuring every legal term and financial accusation was perfectly documented and supported by the undeniable evidence we gathered. The highly anticipated Thanksgiving dinner was only a few short days away. We were going to walk straight into that house holding the absolute legal power to evict my parents and seize their property forever. But Ethan was ensuring my sister would face a much darker, far more permanent fate than simply losing a comfortable suburban home. She was going to lose her personal freedom entirely and face justice. He slowly reached out and gently grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly to offer me a silent surge of incredible strength. "Are you completely ready to pull the trigger on this right now?" he asked, his dark eyes locking firmly onto mine. "Once this information is sent to the federal authorities, there is absolutely no turning back. The government will freeze all her bank accounts immediately and issue federal warrants. She will be completely ruined forever. I thought about the wedding she ruined, the money they stole, and the immense psychological torture they put me through for decades. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I simply nodded my head. Ethan turned back to the laptop and firmly hit send. The next few days passed in a blur of intense preparation and eerie silence from my family. They were too busy organizing their lavish holiday event to bother checking their crumbling financial foundations. When Thanksgiving morning finally arrived, the city was completely quiet, wrapped in a thick blanket of gray frost. I woke up early, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. Today was the day everything would change forever. I walked into my spacious closet, completely bypassing the casual sweaters and comfortable denim jeans I would normally wear to a traditional family holiday dinner. Today, I was not attending as a loving daughter or a compliant sibling. I was attending as the sole owner of Apex Holdings, and I needed to look exactly like the ruthless corporate executioner I had become. I reached into the back of my wardrobe and pulled out a brand new, razor-sharp tailored suit. It was a custom-designed charcoal gray wool ensemble that had cost me $3,000. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and sleek black leather heels. As I buttoned the tailored jacket, I turned to face the full-length mirror mounted on the wall. The reflection staring back at me was incredibly powerful and completely unrecognizable from the timid girl I used to be. Staring at my polished image, a deeply buried memory surfaced, sharp and incredibly bitter. I remembered being 15 years old, standing in the cramped hallway of my childhood home. My mother, Patricia, had just handed me a large plastic garbage bag filled with Brittany's old discarded clothing. My sister was 3 years younger than me, but my mother constantly insisted that I wear her baggy hand-me-downs. Patricia claimed it was a necessary financial measure, but we all knew the real reason. It was a calculated effort to make me feel completely invisible and entirely inferior. While Brittany paraded around in expensive new dresses bought from high-end boutiques, I was forced to wear her faded oversized shirts and frayed jeans. When I dared to complain that the clothes did not fit my body, my mother would just laugh cruelly. She would tell me that beggars could not be choosers, and that I should be grateful to wear anything at all. She wanted me to look like a failure so her golden child could shine even brighter by comparison. I spent my entire adolescence feeling ugly, entirely unworthy and completely out of place in my own home. But the woman standing in the mirror today was no longer that helpless teenager. I had built an empire with my own two hands, and I was wearing the armor of my own immense success. I ran a brush through my hair, tying it back into a severe, elegant knot at the nape of my neck. I applied a bold shade of dark red lipstick, completing the intimidating corporate transformation. Just as I was putting away my makeup, the sharp sound of our apartment doorbell echoed loudly through the quiet hallway. Ethan stepped out of the kitchen holding 2 steaming mugs of black coffee. He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the unexpected interruption on a major federal holiday. I walked past him and pulled the heavy front door open. A uniformed courier was standing in the hallway holding a thick, securely sealed priority envelope. He looked incredibly tired, clearly working overtime on the holiday morning. "Are you?" Madeline, the courier asked, holding out an electronic digital tablet and a plastic stylus. "I need a direct signature for this highly sensitive legal delivery." My heart began to pound, a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I knew exactly what was inside that package. I quickly signed my name on the glowing screen and took the heavy envelope from his hands. I thanked him, closed the front door, and walked straight over to the wooden dining room table. Ethan set the coffee mugs down and stood closely beside me, his eyes locked onto the thick package. I took a sharp pair of scissors and carefully sliced open the top edge of the priority envelope. I pulled out a stack of incredibly dense legal documents, all bearing the official raised seal of the county court system. I flipped to the very last page, my eyes scanning the complex legal terminology, until I found exactly what I was looking for. There it was, signed in bold black ink by a presiding county judge. It was the final, fully approved judicial order. Because Apex Holdings officially owned the fraudulent debt, and because the loan was fundamentally compromised by severe federal crimes, the court had granted my emergency petition. I now possess the absolute undeniable legal authority to instantly evict every single occupant from the suburban house. The tense drive to the wealthy suburban neighborhood took less than 40 minutes, but the heavy anticipation in the cold rental car made it feel like an absolute eternity. Ethan parked our sleek vehicle down the quiet residential street from the property, intentionally keeping us completely out of sight from the large living room windows. The street was completely packed with very expensive luxury vehicles. My parents had clearly pulled out all the stops for this major event. As we finally stepped out into the freezing evening air, a massive black sport utility vehicle pulled up quietly right behind us. Two tall and heavily muscled men stepped out dressed in matching dark tactical suits. They were highly trained private security contractors Ethan had hired specifically for this evening to ensure the eviction proceeded without any physical violence or messy legal complications. We introduced ourselves briefly and they nodded, taking their positions firmly behind us as we began our slow walk toward the large house. The property was brightly illuminated with festive holiday lights. I could hear the loud booming sounds of laughter and cheerful music spilling out into the cold night. We walked quietly up the long paved driveway, crunching over the thin layer of icy frost. Through the large front bay windows, I could clearly see the lavish party in full swing. There were at least 40 people gathered inside. I recognized several wealthy neighbors from the disastrous summer barbecue, numerous extended family members who had sent me vicious hate messages, and a handful of sharp-looking men and women in expensive business attire who were clearly the financial investors my sister was desperately trying to impress. They were all holding crystal glasses filled with expensive champagne, completely oblivious to the massive legal storm that was currently standing right outside their front door. I raised my hand to turn the brass doorknob, but Ethan gently touched my shoulder and pointed through the glass. Inside the expansive living room, my father was standing by the massive stone fireplace, holding a silver spoon and tapping it loudly against his crystal glass to command everyone's immediate attention. The room quickly fell silent. Richard puffed out his chest, his face glowing with immense pride, as he looked directly at my sister Brittany. She was standing right next to him, wearing a glittering gold dress, soaking up the admiring stares of the large crowd. "I want to thank all of you for joining our family on this beautiful Thanksgiving holiday," my father announced loudly, his voice easily carrying through the thick glass of the front window. "Today we have something incredibly special to celebrate. As you all know, building a successful business requires incredible intelligence and unmatched dedication. We are so immensely proud to formally announce that our youngest daughter, Brittany, the absolute genius of this family, has just officially purchased this massive, beautiful home." The entire crowd erupted into loud, enthusiastic applause. My stomach churned with deep disgust as I watched the sickening display. Richard raised his glass higher, a wide, arrogant smile stretching across his face. While some young women waste their potential on useless hobbies or rely heavily on the charity of others, Brittany has proven exactly what true financial independence looks like. She is a shining example of hard work, and this house is the ultimate proof of her incredible success. Let us all raise a glass to the brand new homeowner. The guests cheered loudly, raising their champagne flutes into the air. Brittany smiled modestly, playing the role of the humble self-made entrepreneur perfectly. She had absolutely no idea that her entire fake empire was about to burn completely to the ground. I looked over at Ethan, who gave me a firm, decisive nod. I looked back at the two armed security contractors standing tall and ready behind us. There was no more waiting. There was no more playing the victim. I gripped the heavy brass handle of the front door. It was unlocked exactly as Jamal had promised it would be. I took one final deep breath, letting the freezing winter air completely fill my lungs, and then I pushed with all my might. The heavy wooden front doors banged open with a deafening crash that echoed violently against the high ceilings of the grand foyer. The cheerful holiday music abruptly stopped. 40 pairs of eyes snapped toward the entrance in absolute shock. I stepped confidently into the bright foyer, standing tall in my $3,000 tailored suit. Ethan stepped in right beside me, his face carved from pure stone. And flanking us on either side, stepping into the warm light of the suburban home, were the two heavily armed private security contractors. Their presence instantly draining the smug arrogance from the entire crowded room forever. The heavy wooden front doors slamming against the interior walls was a sound I will never forget. It was the physical manifestation of every single boundary I was finally enforcing. The cheerful holiday playlist, streaming through the expensive surround sound system, was abruptly cut off by someone fumbling with the volume dial. A suffocating silence instantly descended upon the grand living room. 40 pairs of eyes stared at us wide with absolute disbelief. The wealthy investors paused with their champagne glasses halfway to their mouths. My extended family members, the very people who had spent the last several days sending me vile messages, suddenly looked incredibly small and cowardly. The sheer intimidating presence of the two massive private security contractors flanking us sent a very clear message. This was not a friendly holiday visit, this was a hostile corporate takeover. For a brief moment, nobody dared to breathe. Then the shock finally wore off, and my mother's deeply ingrained narcissism violently kicked in. Patricia pushed her way through the frozen crowd of guests, the heels of her expensive shoes clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. Her face was flushed a deep, angry red, the veins in her neck visibly bulging against her heavy diamond necklace. She marched straight toward the grand foyer, completely ignoring the fact that two highly trained, heavily armed men were staring directly at her. She stopped just a few feet away from me, her chest heaving with fabricated outrage. "How dare you bring thugs into my home?" Patricia screamed, her shrill voice echoing off the high ceiling. "You are ruining your sister's special night. Get out of my house right now before I call the police and have you dragged out of here in handcuffs." A low murmur of whispers immediately swept through the crowd of relatives gathered near the large stone fireplace. I could hear my Aunt Brenda muttering to my Uncle Greg. They were waiting for me to break. They fully expected me to shrink back, lower my head, and start crying uncontrollably. That was exactly what the teenage version of Madeline would have done. Whenever Patricia raised her voice and created a public spectacle, the younger me would instantly cower in sheer terror, apologizing profusely just to stop the overwhelming public humiliation. My family had spent decades successfully conditioning me to crumble under the crushing weight of their collective disapproval. They thought the charcoal gray suit I was wearing was just an empty costume. They genuinely believed that deep down, I was still that same terrified, discarded 19-year-old girl begging to be allowed back inside from the freezing cold. But they were completely wrong. I did not cower. I did not shed a single tear. I did not even break eye contact with my mother. I stood perfectly still, letting her angry words completely bounce off my invisible armor. I looked at Patricia not as a daughter seeking maternal love, but as a chief executive officer, evaluating a highly hostile liability. My absolute lack of an emotional response seemed to confuse her. Her angry expression faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a sudden fleeting look of genuine uncertainty. She looked past me to the security guards, finally registering the severe, uncompromising reality of the current situation. Richard quickly stepped up beside her, trying to regain control of his heavily disrupted holiday party. He still held the silver spoon and the crystal glass, looking completely ridiculous in the face of our tactical presence. "Madeline, this is absolutely unacceptable behavior," Richard barked, attempting to project his usual patriarchal authority over the room. "We told you that you could attend this dinner if you sat quietly in the corner. If you cannot behave like a civilized adult, you need to leave this property immediately." He reached out, gesturing aggressively toward the front door behind us. I looked at the silver spoon in his hand, then at the small wireless microphone he had been using to broadcast his arrogant speech to the crowd. I calmly took the microphone directly from his trembling fingers. He was so shocked by my physical assertiveness that he let it go without resistance. I did not speak into it. Instead, I turned slightly and handed the black device to my husband. Ethan took the microphone, stepping forward to stand directly between me and my aggressively posturing parents. He looked at them with the cold, calculating eyes of a seasoned federal prosecutor. He pressed the small button on the side of the device, his deep, commanding voice suddenly projecting loudly through the entire house. "This is not your home," Patricia Ethan stated firmly, the undeniable authority in his tone, completely silencing the room. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, this property is legally owned by Apex Holdings." The reverberating echo of Ethan's voice slowly faded into the shocked silence of the massive living room. For a fleeting second, my father stood entirely frozen, his crystal champagne flute trembling slightly in his grip. Then a loud, aggressive bark of laughter erupted from his chest. It was a harsh, completely forced sound, designed to immediately regain control of the rapidly deteriorating narrative. Richard shook his head in exaggerated disbelief, turning his back to us and facing his wealthy guests with a wide, reassuring smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, please forgive this incredibly distasteful interruption," my father announced loudly, waving his hand dismissively in our general direction as if we were nothing more than a minor nuisance. "This is precisely the kind of sick joke I was warning some of you about earlier this evening. My oldest daughter, Madeline, is unfortunately suffering from a severe mental illness. She has been having a devastating psychological breakdown for several weeks now, and sadly, it seems her new husband is enabling her deeply unhinged delusions. Please do not pay any attention to their ridiculous claims. We are currently in the difficult process of seeking a legal conservatorship to get her the intensive psychiatric help she so desperately requires." A collective sigh of sympathetic relief rippled through the crowd of affluent investors and nosy neighbors. My mother immediately placed a comforting hand on her chest, nodding sorrowfully to sell the tragic narrative of the heartbroken parents dealing with a clinically insane child. They were relying on their lifelong strategy of completely assassinating my character to hide their own deceit, but they severely underestimated the meticulous preparation we had undertaken. I did not waste my breath arguing with my father or screaming at the highly gullible crowd. Instead, I calmly reached into the inside pocket of my charcoal gray tailored jacket and pulled out my mobile phone. Throughout my entire life, my parents had actively mocked my deep interest in technology. They called my data analytics startup a complete waste of time and insisted that staring at computer screens was not a respectable profession for a woman. They never bothered to understand the digital world I commanded. And because of their immense arrogance, they never bothered to secure their own home network. Earlier today, Jamal had provided me with the direct administrative access codes to their smart home devices. With 3 quick taps on my glowing screen, I instantly hijacked the massive 75-inch smart television mounted directly above the stone fireplace. The festive holiday screensaver instantly vanished, replaced by a glaringly bright white document that illuminated the entire living room. Gasps echoed through the wealthy crowd as people squinted to read the massive text projected right in front of them. It was a crystal-clear, high-resolution image of the fraudulent property deed and the home equity line of credit application. "There is absolutely no mental illness here," I said loudly, my voice steady and carrying easily without the need for a microphone. "I want every single investor in this room to look very closely at the screen behind my father. Look at the signatures at the bottom of those legal documents." The room fell deathly quiet as the guests read the undeniable proof of federal wire fraud. Richard turned around, his smug smile instantly collapsing as all the color aggressively drained from his face. He stared at the massive projection of his own sloppy forgery, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. I swiped my thumb across my phone screen, and the image on the television immediately changed. Now it displayed the highly detailed bank transaction ledger. It showed the exact flow of the stolen money, tracing the massive cash withdrawal straight from the fraudulent bank loan directly into the offshore cryptocurrency accounts. The wealthy neighbors who had just been pitying my supposed mental breakdown were now staring at my parents with absolute horror and intense disgust. They were finally seeing the undeniable truth that my family had successfully hidden behind their manicured lawns and lavish parties for decades. My mother covered her mouth with both hands, stepping away from the fireplace as if the television screen itself was physically radiating intense heat. The prominent local politicians and wealthy business investors rapidly began setting their crystal champagne glasses down on the expensive wooden tables, eager to distance themselves from this highly illegal catastrophe. The grand illusion of their perfect family was entirely shattered. I took one final step forward into the massive room, ensuring every single person present could hear my final decree. "You forged my name for $150,000, I spoke loudly, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "So I bought the debt. You defaulted. The house is mine and you are officially trespassing." The undeniable truth hung heavily, suffocating the festive atmosphere. Nobody moved. Then a sharp, piercing shriek shattered the absolute silence of the grand living room. It was Brittany. She dropped her champagne flute, letting it shatter completely on the expensive hardwood floor. She lunged forward, her gold dress flashing under the bright chandeliers, and rushed wildly toward the massive 75-inch smart television mounted above the stone fireplace. She waved her arms, trying to block the glowing screen, as if her body could somehow hide the undeniable evidence of her massive financial crimes, projected right behind her. "She is a liar!" Brittany screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with desperation. "She is a jealous, pathetic liar who forged all of these documents herself to ruin my special night. Turn that stupid television off right now." But nobody moved to help her. The wealthy investors and affluent neighbors she had spent months desperately trying to impress with her fabricated lifestyle brand were now backing away from her. They physically recoiled, stepping backward toward the grand foyer, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and my sister. Brittany spun around, her perfectly styled blonde hair falling wildly across her face. She looked at the prominent local politicians, her eyes wide with panic, silently begging them to intervene and validate her completely manufactured reality. But they averted their eyes, whispering harshly to their spouses about contacting their corporate lawyers to protect their investments. Seeing her wealthy audience completely abandon her triggered an explosive, venomous rage inside Brittany. She turned her wild eyes back to me, her face contorting into an ugly, bitter mask of pure hatred. "I deserve this house," Brittany yelled, stomping her expensive heels against the floor like a deeply spoiled toddler throwing a massive tantrum. "I am the one who has to stay here and deal with Mom and Dad every single day. I am the one who brings actual prestige to this family name. You never actually worked for anything in your entire life, Madeline. You just got completely lucky with your stupid computer job while I had to hustle to build a real brand from nothing. You have absolutely no right to come in here and try to take what belongs to me." Her profound delusion was truly staggering to witness. She stood there completely surrounded by the undeniable digital proof of her massive federal wire fraud, still passionately demanding to be treated like an incredibly successful entrepreneur. She genuinely believed that her superficial appearance and manipulative charm somehow entitled her to the fruits of my grueling labor. She believed that staying home and spending my hard-earned money was a legitimate career path that deserved a massive luxury real estate reward. I looked at her, completely unbothered by her screaming. I had spent my entire childhood feeling deeply inferior to her, constantly comparing my own quiet ambition to her loud, aggressive demands for total attention. But looking at her right now, screaming and thrashing in her ruined gold dress, I felt absolutely nothing but cold, clinical pity. "You did not hustle, Brittany," I replied, my voice completely calm and perfectly steady. "You stole. You stole from my bank accounts. You stole my personal identity, and you stole the equity out of the property that I graciously allowed our parents to live in. And you did not even use that stolen money to build a legitimate business. You threw it all away because you are completely addicted to pretending you are something you are not." She lunged forward, raising her hand as if she was actually going to strike me across the face. But before she could even take 2 full steps, Ethan smoothly shifted his weight, firmly blocking her path with his broad shoulders. The two highly trained private security contractors immediately stepped forward, their hands resting cautiously on their tactical belts. Brittany froze instantly, her aggressive momentum completely halted by the intimidating wall of sheer physical force standing directly in front of her. She backed away, her chest heaving, realizing for the very first time in her entirely pampered life that she could not simply bully or cry her way out of the devastating consequences of her own terrible actions. She looked frantically around the room, desperate for a final escape route. That is when I decided it was time to deliver the ultimate crushing blow to her completely fake empire. I raised my right hand into the air and loudly snapped my fingers. The security guard standing to my left immediately walked past. My terrified parents approached the massive dining table and dropped a thick stack of papers right on top of the carved Thanksgiving turkey. "Those are the wire transfers to your illegal bookies, Brittany," I said clearly. The heavy thud of the paper stack landing on the perfectly roasted bird sent a massive shockwave through the room. Gravy splattered across the white linen tablecloth, staining the pristine surface like dark blood. Brittany stared at the thick documents, her face completely draining of all remaining color. She could no longer scream or thrash around in her expensive gold dress. The undeniable proof of her highly illicit transactions was literally sitting on the center of the holiday dinner table. Richard, seeing his beloved golden child backed into an inescapable corner and his own massive fraud fully exposed to the wealthy neighborhood, resorted to the only desperate tactic he had left. He relied on pure, toxic entitlement and deep-seated prejudice. He spun around his face, turning a dark shade of purple with intense rage, and locked his furious eyes directly onto Jamal. "Jamal," my father barked loudly, his voice laced with the exact same entitled disgust he had openly used for years. "Do not just stand there staring like a completely useless coward. Be a real man for once in your pathetic life. Grab her by the arm and throw her out of my house immediately. Throw both of them out right now before I call the actual police." The entire grand living room went completely dead silent. 40 pairs of wealthy, terrified eyes rapidly shifted from my raging father to the tall, highly observant information technology specialist standing quietly near the edge of the dining area. Jamal had always been the silent shadow in this loud, chaotic house. He had patiently endured their constant microaggressions, the overtly racist insults, and the endless daily degradation with a stoic, polite smile. The affluent guests waited with bated breath, fully expecting him to blindly obey Richard's aggressive command like a well-trained, obedient servant trying to earn his place in the elite family hierarchy. But Jamal did not move a single inch toward me. He did not raise his hand against my husband Ethan, nor did he even glance at the two heavily armed private security contractors standing firmly by the front door. Instead, he slowly raised his large hands up to his collar and calmly straightened his dark silk tie. The incredibly subtle, highly controlled gesture instantly commanded the absolute attention of every single person still remaining in the room. He took two slow, highly deliberate steps forward, effectively placing his large frame directly between my father and his quietly weeping wife. He looked at my father with eyes as cold and hard as obsidian glass. For 5 entire years, Richard Jamal began speaking his deep voice, smooth, steady, and dangerously calm. For 5 long years, you called me boy every single time you thought I was out of earshot or too distracted to notice your blatant disrespect. You constantly went out of your way to remind me that I did not come from your incredibly wealthy, privileged background. You told me right to my face that I was simply not good enough for your beautiful, brilliant daughter. You treated my highly specialized, lucrative corporate career like I was just a low-level neighborhood repairman you could order around to fix your broken wireless routers for free. Richard physically took a step backward, genuinely shocked by the sudden fierce insubordination from the man he had spent years ruthlessly bullying. "I generously gave you a respectable place in this prominent family," Richard sputtered defensively, trying desperately to maintain his rapidly crumbling patriarchal authority in front of the horrified investors. You gave me a front row seat to a pathetic criminal enterprise masquerading as a successful suburban family. Jamal corrected him sharply, his voice slicing through the thick tension in the room like a razor-sharp blade. You aggressively demanded my total respect simply because you possessed a larger bank account balance, completely ignoring the blatant fact that you built your entire comfortable life on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and massive credit card debt. I quietly watched you emotionally belittle and abuse Madeline for years, while you endlessly praised Brittany for doing absolutely nothing but stealing other people's hard-earned money. I stayed completely silent and took your abuse because I was patiently gathering every single piece of encrypted digital evidence required to permanently and utterly dismantle your entire fraudulent operation. Brittany looked at her husband with absolute terror. Jamal simply ignored my father completely and turned toward my weeping sister. He reached into the pocket of his perfectly tailored suit jacket and calmly pulled out a highly official legal document. He extended his arm firmly, handing the thick white envelope directly to Brittany. "I am filing for divorce," Jamal announced loudly, "and I am taking full custody of the dog." "Enjoy your long time in federal prison," he stated coldly. Brittany stared at the crisp white envelope in her trembling hands as if it were a venomous snake. For a fleeting second, the sheer weight of his chilling words seemed to entirely paralyze her. Then a primal, ear-piercing scream erupted from deep within her throat. She violently tore the thick envelope open, pulling out the meticulously drafted legal documents. With wild, frantic motions, she began ripping the heavy paper into tiny shreds, throwing the pieces into the air like demented confetti. "You cannot leave me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking under the intense strain of her total mental collapse. "You are absolutely nothing without this prestigious family," she screamed wildly. "I am the star here, and you are just a pathetic nobody who got incredibly lucky to marry into immense wealth. I will never sign these divorce papers, and I will completely destroy your entire life." Jamal did not even flinch as the torn pieces of his formal divorce petition fluttered down onto the gravy-stained tablecloth. He simply brushed a small, stray piece of paper from the lapel of his perfectly tailored suit jacket. He had already expected this exact theatrical and very highly emotional reaction from her. He calmly turned his back on his hysterical, soon-to-be ex-wife and directed his sharp gaze toward the cluster of wealthy investors standing nervously near the grand staircase. These were the prominent local businessmen and affluent socialites who had proudly written massive checks to fund the supposedly skyrocketing lifestyle brand. They were now looking at him with expressions of intense anxiety, suddenly realizing that the quiet technology specialist knew far more about their personal investments than they did. "For those of you standing in this room who graciously wrote seed money checks," Jamal announced loudly and very clearly, "I highly suggest you contact your corporate financial advisors and legal defense teams immediately." The affluent investors exchanged deeply terrified glances. A tall man in a tailored navy blue suit stepped forward, his face pale with sudden dread. "What exactly are you talking about?" the nervous investor demanded aggressively. "We invested our money into a rapidly expanding digital marketing and luxury lifestyle platform." Jamal let out a sharp, completely humorless laugh that echoed loudly against the high ceilings. "You did not invest in a lifestyle platform," Jamal corrected him ruthlessly, staring directly into the wide eyes of the terrified crowd. "You invested directly into an incredibly sophisticated international money laundering operation. For the past 2 years, Brittany has been using your legitimate corporate capital to actively wash dirty money for a highly dangerous illegal gambling syndicate operating right here in the city. She generated completely fake invoices for non-existent brand deals, took a hefty percentage to buy her designer dresses, and funneled every single remaining dollar of your investments straight into an offshore cryptocurrency casino to cover her own massive, crippling gambling debts." The collective gasp from the wealthy crowd was incredibly loud and filled with absolute pure horror. The investors realized in an instant that their names, their reputable corporate entities, and their clean money were now directly tied to a massive federal crime. The tall man in the navy blue suit stumbled backward, pulling out his mobile phone with visibly shaking hands. He frantically began dialing his private attorney. The other affluent neighbors and local politicians rapidly followed suit, a wave of sheer panic washing over the entire holiday gathering. They had come to celebrate a brilliant young entrepreneur, and they were leaving as potential unindicted suspects in a major federal fraud investigation spanning multiple government agencies. Richard tried to step forward to do damage control, desperately raising his hands to calm the panicked investors. "Please do not listen to this disgruntled, ungrateful man." My father pleaded, his voice trembling with absolute terror as he watched his entire social standing evaporate in real time. "He is just trying to extort us because his marriage is failing." Jamal completely ignored the pathetic attempts to lie his way out of the inescapable corner. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out his mobile phone, calmly checking the bright glass screen for any newly arrived urgent digital messages tonight. He slowly lifted his left wrist, deliberately checking the exact time on his polished silver watch. The room fell into a tense, terrified silence as everyone waited to hear what the brilliant man would say next. He looked directly at Brittany, who was now sobbing hysterically on the hardwood floor, surrounded by the ripped pieces of her divorce papers. He then shifted his cold, uncompromising gaze to my completely ruined parents. "By the way, I formally submitted the massive whistleblower report to the IRS 48 hours ago," Jamal said. "Your bank accounts were frozen at exactly 5 p.m. today." The devastating reality of Jamal's words hung heavily in the air. Frozen bank accounts. The IRS. Those specific phrases possessed a terrifying power that could completely shatter even the most deeply entrenched delusions of grandeur. Richard stood utterly paralyzed near the fireplace, his face transitioning from a pale, sickly white to a dangerous purple. His entire meticulously crafted suburban kingdom had just been entirely wiped out of existence by the one man he had spent the last 5 years relentlessly belittling. The affluent guests, who had not already fled the living room, were now scrambling backward, desperate to escape the inevitable fallout. My father looked wildly around the ruined holiday gathering. He looked at the massive smart television still projecting the undeniable proof of his felony fraud. He looked at his golden child Brittany weeping uncontrollably on the floor amidst her shredded divorce papers. And finally, his manic gaze locked onto the decorated dining table. Resting right next to the gravy-stained turkey was a sharp silver carving knife. Something inside Richard completely snapped. The carefully maintained facade of the respectable patriarch vanished entirely, revealing the vicious cornered animal hiding underneath. With a guttural roar of pure rage, Richard suddenly lunged forward. He abandoned all remaining logic and reason, entirely consumed by his violent impulse to destroy the man who had just dismantled his fake empire. He grabbed the heavy silver handle of the carving knife, raising the gleaming blade high above his head. He charged directly at Jamal, his eyes wild with dangerous intent. I screamed, a sharp warning tearing from my throat. But Jamal did not even have time to brace himself for the sudden physical attack. Before the heavy blade could begin its descent, a dark blur moved with terrifying speed across my field of vision. It was Ethan. My husband did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. Years of intense martial arts training and his deeply ingrained protective instincts instantly took over. Ethan closed the physical distance in 2 massive strides, firmly planting his feet and intercepting my raging father mid-sprint. He moved with a cold, calculated precision that was absolutely mesmerizing to witness. Ethan brought his left forearm up violently, blocking Richard's striking arm and completely halting the downward momentum of the sharp carving knife. Simultaneously, Ethan stepped inside my father's guard, pivoting his hips and grabbing Richard's wrist with his right hand. With a sharp, powerful twist, Ethan applied immense joint pressure. Richard shrieked in sudden, agonizing pain as his fingers involuntarily opened, dropping the heavy knife. The metal blade clattered loudly against the polished hardwood floor, sliding harmlessly away under a wooden chair. Without missing a single beat, Ethan seamlessly transitioned his firm grip, sweeping Richard's legs out from under him and driving the older man hard against the edge of the massive dining table. Ethan firmly pinned my father face down against the white linen tablecloth, holding his arms securely behind his back in a submission hold. The entire violent altercation lasted less than 4 seconds. The two armed private security contractors immediately rushed forward to assist, but Ethan already had the situation entirely under control. Richard, pressed against the ruined holiday dinner, began thrashing wildly. "I am an old man," Richard gasped loudly, turning his face to look at the horrified crowd of wealthy investors. "You are assaulting me. Let me go right now. You are assaulting an elderly man in his own home." It was the ultimate predictable display of his incredibly toxic psychology. Even while pinned to a table mere seconds after actively trying to stab someone with a carving knife, my father was still desperately trying to play the innocent victim. This was the exact same manipulative tactic he had used my entire life. Whenever he was legally or morally in the wrong, he would instantly twist the narrative, portraying himself as the injured party and demanding sympathy from anyone gullible enough to listen. He expected the remaining affluent neighbors to rush to his defense and condemn Ethan for using physical force against a senior citizen, but nobody moved a single inch to help him. The crowd simply stared in absolute shock and deep revulsion, finally seeing the violent monster hiding behind the expensive suits. My mother Patricia stood frozen against the wall, clutching her chest, unable to process the total destruction of her perfect family image. Ethan maintained his firm grip on my father, ignoring the pathetic cries of manufactured victimhood. The suffocating silence in the room was suddenly broken by a loud sound echoing from the streets outside. The sound rapidly grew louder and more urgent, piercing through the neighborhood. I turned my head and looked out the windows. Sirens wail in the distance. Blue and red lights flash through the windows. The flashing blue and red lights painted the living room walls in frantic, strobing colors. Heavy boots pounded against the front porch concrete. The massive wooden doors allowed 4 uniformed police officers to rush directly into the grand foyer. They entered with their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts, scanning the chaotic scene of the ruined Thanksgiving dinner. The wealthy investors were huddled near the staircase. My sister was sobbing uncontrollably on the floor, and my husband was firmly pinning my father against the gravy-stained table. The moment my mother saw the badges, her entire demeanor shifted instantly. She transformed from a frozen statue of shock into a brilliant actress, performing the greatest tragic role of her life. Patricia ran toward the officers, tears streaming down her carefully powdered face. She threw her arms out, pointing a trembling finger directly at me. "Arrest her right now!" Patricia cried, her voice cracking with perfectly manufactured hysteria. "She brought armed thugs into our beautiful home. She is completely insane and trying to murder my husband. Help us, please." The 3 younger officers immediately tensed their eyes, darting between Ethan and the security contractors standing near the entrance. But the lead officer, a tall man with graying hair, held up a single gloved hand to halt his team. He stepped past my weeping mother and looked directly into my eyes. I stared back at him, a sudden shock of recognition hitting my chest. His name badge read Miller. 17 years ago, Officer Miller was just a young patrolman working the night shift. When I was 16 years old, I finally broke under the immense psychological abuse of living in this house. I packed a small backpack and ran away into the freezing November night. I made it as far as the downtown bus terminal before Officer Miller found me shivering on a metal bench. I begged him not to take me back. I pleaded with him, explaining how my parents treated me like a worthless servant while showering Brittany with endless praise and affection. But I was a minor, and the law dictated he had to return me to my legal guardians. I remember sitting in the back of his patrol car, crying silently as he drove me right back to this exact suburban driveway. When he walked me up to the front door, Patricia burst out crying, hugging me tightly, and telling the young officer how much they loved me and how worried sick they were. It was a flawless performance. The moment his patrol car pulled away, she dropped the loving mother act, entirely dragged me inside by my hair, and locked me in my room for 3 straight days. Officer Miller had looked deeply conflicted that night, clearly sensing the dark truth hiding beneath Patricia's perfect suburban tears. Now standing in the ruined dining room 17 years later, he looked at my expensive tailored suit, the security contractors, and the undeniable evidence of fraud projected on the television. He looked back at Patricia, who was still weeping and demanding my immediate arrest. "Ma'am, please step back." Officer Miller said, his voice entirely devoid of the sympathy she was desperately trying to extract. He walked right past her outstretched arms, completely ignoring her dramatic performance. He approached the dining table where Ethan was still holding Richard securely in the submission hold. Ethan looked up at the veteran officer. This man just attempted to stab another guest with a silver carving knife. Ethan reported, calmly gesturing his head toward the sharp blade resting underneath the nearby wooden chair. "And we have an official federal warrant regarding his financial accounts." Ethan carefully used his free hand to pull the thick legal folder from his jacket. He handed the documents directly to Officer Miller. The veteran officer opened the folder, his eyes scanning the certified court seals and the detailed IRS whistleblower reports. He looked up at the large screen showing the forged property deed. He did not need to ask any confusing questions. The massive web of my parents' criminal enterprise was laid out with absolute crystal clarity. Officer Miller closed the heavy folder and tucked it safely under his arm. He gave me a very small nod of deep understanding. He turned his attention to my father, who was still playing the victim against the white linen tablecloth. Instead of helping my father stand up, Officer Miller pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. He grabbed Richard's right wrist from Ethan, twisting it firmly behind my father's back. "What are you doing?" my father screamed wildly. "You are supposed to be arresting her." Officer Miller secured the handcuffs with a sharp click. "Richard, you are officially under arrest for attempted assault and felony wire fraud," Officer Miller announced loudly. The metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut echoed with absolute finality over the quiet murmurs of the horrified crowd. Richard struggled uselessly against the heavy steel restraints. Officer Miller easily hauled him up from the gravy-stained tablecloth, pulling him to his feet with practiced force. My father, the proud patriarch who had spent his entire life obsessing over appearances, was now covered in ruined turkey drippings and wearing police cuffs in front of the most prominent citizens in our community. He looked frantically at Patricia, his eyes begging her to somehow fix this massive catastrophe. But my mother was completely broken. Seeing her husband arrested and her entire fake suburban empire collapsing around her, Patricia finally shattered. She dropped heavily to the polished hardwood floor. Patricia fell directly to her knees right in front of me, her expensive silk dress pooling around her legs. She reached out with trembling hands, desperately grabbing the hem of my tailored suit jacket. "Madeline, please," Patricia sobbed hysterically, looking up at me with mascara streaked heavily down her pale cheeks. "You have to call them off. Tell the officers it was all a terrible misunderstanding. You cannot just stand there and let them take your father to jail. He is an old man. We are your family. We are your blood. You cannot do this to us. You cannot take the house and leave us completely homeless out on the freezing streets." I looked down at the weeping woman clutching my clothes. For decades, I had absolutely craved this woman's approval. I had twisted myself into 1,000 different shapes, enduring endless cruelty and financial exploitation just to earn a single scrap of genuine maternal affection. But looking at her now, begging on her knees only because she was facing the severe legal consequences of her own terrible actions, I felt absolutely nothing. The deep emotional well I once had for her was entirely dry. I calmly reached down and peeled her desperate fingers off my expensive suit jacket, stepping back to create a firm physical boundary. "You left me homeless when I was 18 years old," I stated clearly, my voice carrying a cold, uncompromising truth that silenced her desperate sobbing. "You kicked me out into the freezing winter night simply because I refused to hand over my college scholarship money to fund Brittany's lavish European vacation. You did not care about my safety or my future when you threw my bags onto the front porch. You told me I had to learn how the real world operated. Well, Mom, this is the exact lesson you taught me. You committed felony wire fraud. You stole my equity to fund an illegal gambling syndicate because of the federal fraud alert. Ethan filed your credit score is now a perfect 0. The banks have completely frozen your savings accounts. You have absolutely no retirement funds left. And as of this morning, you no longer have a house. Welcome to the real world. Patricia gasped as if she had been violently struck. She covered her face with her hands, weeping with the terrifying realization that her immense social and financial ruin was permanent. Officer Miller handed my father off to one of the younger patrolmen, who immediately escorted the disgraced patriarch out the front door toward the waiting police cruisers. The red and blue lights flashing through the bay windows cast harsh, unforgiving shadows across the grand living room. The affluent guests had retreated into the grand foyer completely silent, watching the ultimate destruction of the family they had once admired. Officer Miller turned his attention back to my weeping mother and my sister, who was still sitting frozen on the floor amidst her shredded divorce papers. Ma'am, the property now legally belongs to the corporate entity, Apex Holdings Officer Miller announced firmly, his authoritative voice leaving no room for argument or negotiation. The owner has explicitly requested your immediate removal from the premises. Because there are active federal investigations regarding the massive financial assets inside this home, you are not permitted to remove any furniture, electronics, or valuable jewelry items. You and your younger daughter need to vacate the property right now. Brittany finally looked up, her tear-streaked face twisting in absolute disbelief. But all of my expensive designer clothes are upstairs in my custom closet. She whined loudly, completely failing to grasp the gravity of her impending federal prison sentence. I need to pack my things. This is my home. You do not live here anymore. Officer Miller replied coldly, gesturing toward the front door. Two armed private security contractors stepped forward, pulling thick, heavy-duty black plastic trash bags from their tactical vests. You are allowed exactly 1 trash bag of clothes each, he ordered. You have 5 minutes. The strict 5-minute countdown began immediately. The remaining affluent guests did not wait around to offer any comforting words or final goodbyes. They scrambled frantically toward the grand foyer, completely abandoning their expensive coats in the hallway closet. They just wanted to escape the massive federal crime scene before the authorities decided to ask them any difficult questions. The loud slamming of the heavy front doors echoed repeatedly as the prominent politicians and wealthy investors fled into the freezing winter night. Inside the ruined living room, pure chaos unfolded. Patricia let out a loud, agonizing wail and scrambled up from the hardwood floor. She grabbed one of the heavy-duty black plastic trash bags from the security contractor and practically ran up the grand, sweeping staircase. Brittany followed closely behind her, sobbing uncontrollably and tripping over the long hem of her expensive gold dress. The heavy thud of their frantic footsteps vibrated through the quiet ceiling above us. Ethan walked over to the dining table, poured 2 glasses of expensive red wine from an open bottle, and calmly handed one to me. We stood in complete silence, listening to the frantic sounds of my mother and sister tearing through their massive walk-in closets. They only had 5 minutes to condense their entire lavish suburban existence into 2 disposable plastic bags. For years, they had accumulated immense amounts of unnecessary luxury goods using my hard-earned money. They bought designer handbags, imported Italian shoes, and custom diamond jewelry simply to impress people who fundamentally did not care about them. Now none of those expensive material possessions mattered at all. The police officers stood firmly at the bottom of the staircase, occasionally checking their watches to ensure the strict deadline was met. Exactly 4 minutes and 50 seconds later, Patricia and Brittany slowly descended the stairs. They looked absolutely pathetic. My mother had thrown a heavy mink coat over her stained silk dress, clutching the bulging black trash bag tightly against her chest. Brittany was shivering violently, her perfect blonde hair tangled and ruined. She was struggling to carry her incredibly heavy plastic bag, which was undoubtedly stuffed with whatever designer items she foolishly thought she could easily pawn for quick cash. They did not look at me as they reached the bottom of the stairs. They kept their eyes firmly fixed on the floor, deeply ashamed and completely broken. Officer Miller gestured toward the front door, silently ordering them to leave the premises immediately. The two heavily armed private security contractors stepped aside, allowing my mother and sister to walk out onto the front porch. Ethan and I followed slowly behind them, stepping out into the freezing November air. The scene waiting for them outside was far more devastating than anything I could have possibly orchestrated myself. The wealthy neighbors, the exact same people Patricia had spent decades manipulating and gossiping with, had not gone back inside their warm houses. Dozens of people were standing openly on the cold sidewalks and paved driveways, completely unbothered by the freezing temperature. They were all holding their glowing mobile phones up high, recording every single agonizing second of the humiliating spectacle. The red and blue police lights illuminated my mother and sister as they dragged their heavy black trash bags down the long concrete driveway. Brittany immediately dropped her head desperately, trying to hide her face behind her tangled blonde hair. Her massive, fabricated influencer reputation was being entirely destroyed in a matter of mere minutes. The humiliating videos of her carrying a garbage bag while her father sat handcuffed in a police cruiser would inevitably be uploaded to every single social media platform before midnight. There was absolutely no coming back from this immense public disgrace. She could never post another fake luxury lifestyle photo ever again. Patricia stumbled over a raised crack in the pavement, her expensive heels completely unsuited for carrying heavy garbage. Not a single neighbor stepped forward to help her. They simply continued filming, watching the arrogant suburban queen finally lose her stolen crown. I stood quietly on the wide front porch, the freezing wind whipping through my hair. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the rich red Thanksgiving wine, savoring the incredibly complex flavor. I watched them drag their pathetic plastic bags all the way down to the icy curb, stepping out into the dark street with absolutely nowhere to go. They were completely stripped of their wealth, their fake status, and their stolen home forever. I did not feel any regret or sadness watching them depart. I turned around, stepped back inside the warm, brightly lit house, and firmly closed the heavy wooden door behind me. With a profound sense of absolute peace settling over my heart, I reached up and locked the deadbolt. Exactly 1 year has passed since I locked that heavy deadbolt and walked away from the toxic ruins of my family. I am currently sitting in the corner office of my data analytics startup headquarters, looking out through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline below. The morning sun reflects brightly off the glass skyscrapers, a beautiful daily reminder of the incredible empire I built with my own two hands. I take a slow sip of hot black coffee and look back down at the highly detailed financial quarterly report resting on my sleek mahogany desk. My company has tripled in total valuation over the last 12 months. We successfully secured 3 massive government contracts and expanded our operations internationally. Life is incredibly peaceful now. The heavy, suffocating dark cloud of guilt and toxic obligation that hovered over my entire childhood is completely gone forever. The justice system moved surprisingly fast once the federal investigators verified all the digital evidence Ethan provided. My father Richard, the incredibly arrogant patriarch who obsessed over his pristine suburban reputation, is currently serving a mandatory 3-year sentence in a minimum security federal correctional facility. He tried to hire an expensive defense attorney to fight the severe charges, but without access to the stolen home equity funds, he was forced to accept a highly overworked public defender. His days of wearing expensive tailored suits and giving pompous speeches at lavish neighborhood barbecues are permanently over. He now wears a standard khaki uniform and works in the hot prison laundry room, taking direct orders from the exact type of working-class people he spent his entire life looking down upon. The profound humiliation of his absolute downfall broke his arrogant spirit completely. My mother, Patricia, experienced an equally devastating crash back into harsh reality. Without my $5,000 monthly allowance and completely stripped of her stolen suburban property, she was forced to declare total personal bankruptcy. The highly manipulative woman who once forced me to wear baggy, hand-me-down clothes while she paraded around in imported Italian silk dresses is now living in a highly cramped, heavily rusted mobile home located in a run-down trailer park on the dusty outskirts of the city. To pay her basic utility bills, she works the grueling graveyard night shift at a local gas station. I heard from a former affluent neighbor that she spends her long, tiring shifts standing behind a thick, bulletproof glass window, ringing up cheap cigarettes and scratch-off lottery tickets while wearing a highly unflattering polyester uniform shirt. Her elite country club friends completely abandoned her the exact second her bank accounts were frozen solid by the strict federal authorities. Brittany is faring even worse than our disgraced parents. My golden child sister is currently awaiting her highly publicized federal criminal trial. The illegal gambling syndicate she worked for completely cut all ties with her, leaving her entirely exposed to the massive money laundering and severe wire fraud charges. She currently faces up to 15 long years in federal prison. Her fake influencer lifestyle brand was instantly eradicated from the internet, and she now spends her incredibly lonely days sitting in a cheap rented motel room, anxiously waiting for her inevitable sentencing hearing. Ironically, the very same extended relatives who aggressively flooded my phone with vicious hate text messages during my Hawaiian honeymoon suddenly experienced a massive change of heart. My Aunt Brenda and Uncle Greg began sending me pathetic, long-winded electronic messages begging for massive emergency financial loans to fix their leaking roofs or pay their overdue medical bills. They falsely praised my brilliant business success and desperately claimed they always knew I was the truly special child of the entire family. I did not reply to a single lying message. I simply blocked every single one of their phone numbers permanently, severing their unearned access to my peaceful life and my hard-earned wealth. I set the thick quarterly financial report down on my mahogany desk, just as my heavy wooden office door swings wide open. Jamal walks confidently into the sunny room, holding a sleek silver computer tablet in his right hand. He is wearing a sharp navy blue tailored suit, looking every inch the highly elite corporate executive he truly is today. Following his incredibly messy divorce from my ruined sister, I immediately hired Jamal to join my rapidly expanding technology company. He is now the Chief Information Security Officer for my entire organization, commanding a massive six-figure corporate salary and managing a dedicated team of 50 software engineers. He walks directly up to my desk, holding his hand up high. We share a loud, echoing high five over a massive new tech contract he just secured for our rapidly growing startup. Later that evening, we decided to celebrate our recent corporate victories properly. We left the busy startup headquarters and drove back to my brand new high-rise penthouse apartment located right in the vibrant heart of the downtown financial district of this amazing city. I stepped out onto the expansive glass balcony, letting the cool evening breeze wash over me. The sprawling city skyline stretched out endlessly in every single direction. Millions of bright, glittering lights reflected beautifully in the dark glass, illuminating the incredible life I had built from absolute scratch through endless hard work and deep, unbreakable dedication. Ethan stepped out onto the terrace right behind me, wrapping his strong, warm arms securely around my waist and resting his chin gently on my shoulder. Jamal followed closely behind him, holding 3 crystal glasses filled with incredibly expensive celebratory champagne. We stood there together in comfortable, companionable silence, looking out over the glowing metropolis. This was my real family now. We were not bound together by arbitrary genetic ties or forced legal obligations. We were firmly bound by mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and a shared understanding of what it truly meant to survive toxic environments and rebuild our lives completely on our own terms. Standing on this beautiful balcony, I took a moment to deeply reflect on the incredible journey that had finally brought me to this profound state of absolute peace. For so many years, society relentlessly conditioned me to believe that I owed my parents endless forgiveness, simply because they brought me into this world. We are constantly bombarded with the incredibly harmful narrative that women specifically must always be the emotional peacemakers in their families. We are heavily pressured to forgive and forget horrific abuse, swallow our deep pain, and continually sacrifice our own hard-earned boundaries just to keep the toxic peace around the holiday dinner table. People who have never experienced the suffocating grip of a narcissistic family dynamic love to preach that blood is always thicker than water. They insist that you must never completely abandon your parents or your siblings, no matter how terribly they treat you, or how relentlessly they try to destroy your personal freedom. But I learned the absolute hardest way possible that true, authentic power does not come from endlessly suffering in complete silence. True power comes from having the immense courage to forcefully sever the deep rot before it completely infects your entire soul. If a massive tree has a completely diseased branch, you do not simply leave it attached and hope the healthy leaves will somehow magically cure the deep decay. You must cut the poisoned branch off completely to save the rest of the tree from dying. I had to become the ruthless gardener of my own life. I had to use the strict, heavy hand of the federal legal system to aggressively amputate the toxic members of my own family. It was not a cruel act of malicious vengeance, but a highly necessary act of profound self-preservation. If I had simply listened to the demanding voices of my extended relatives or succumbed to my mother's pathetic weeping on the living room floor, I would have lost absolutely everything. My thriving startup company, my beautiful, peaceful marriage, and my own mental sanity would have been entirely consumed by their endless greed and their massive criminal debt. By choosing myself and aggressively enforcing my unshakable boundaries, I finally broke the toxic generational curse forever. I no longer carry the heavy, crushing weight of their impossible expectations. I am finally completely free to exist exactly as I am. Jamal handed me my crystal champagne flute and gently clinked his glass against mine. Ethan smiled brightly, kissing the side of my head as we all raised our drinks high into the cool night air. We shared a silent, meaningful toast to our absolute freedom and our hard-won independence. I took a slow, satisfying sip of the crisp, sparkling wine, feeling significantly lighter and more powerful than I ever had in my entire 33 years of existence. The cool wind rushed past us, carrying the distant sounds of the thriving city below. I look out at the beautiful, glowing city lights, and I know with absolute certainty that I will never again allow anyone to make me feel small or unworthy. I will forever protect the wonderful, beautiful life I have built with every single ounce of my strength. My heart is finally completely healed, and my spirit is beautifully whole once again today. Remember that blood does not make you family, respect does. Have you ever had to legally destroy a toxic family member to save yourself? Tell me your story in the comments. Like and subscribe if you believe in taking your power back.